Today I'm going to show you how to make a double mortise and tenon joint. Why? Because it's awesome. The classic mortise and tenon joint is a hallmark of high quality furniture, but there are some cases where a double mortise and tenon could offer some benefits. In larger workpieces such as these, a double mortise and tenon joint actually offers twice as much surface area for the glue. So instead of just having these outside cheeks as glue surfaces, you now have two inside cheeks in addition, and that could very well make the joint stronger. Just like any other joint, there are a lot of different ways that you can cut it, but we're going to use the router to do the mortise and the table saw to do the tenon. Let's start with that mortise. Now the first thing I need to do is lay out the mortise, and I'm just using one of my tenon pieces here to mark the start and stop point of the workpiece. And now I need to draw in all of my shoulders, what will essentially be the tenon shoulders later. But this mortise is going to start 3/8 of an inch in from each edge, and 3/8 of an inch from the outside edge of the workpiece. And this is the area that we'll be doing our routing, and we stop at these inner lines. Now I want a 3/8 inch mortise, so I've got a 3/8 inch router bit in here, and of course an edge guide, which is going to help me set it the right distance from the edge of the workpiece. And it's really just a matter of pushing the bit down, making contact with the workpiece, and lining it up with the pencil lines. Now I stopped here because I wanted to show you this is a really cool technique that I like to use when routing mortises, and that is to plunge at the beginning, so I get pretty close to my line, and then plunge at the end. What this does is it gives me a nice area where it's very clear where I'm hitting wood, and then once I feel the router hit open space, I know I'm done. If you don't do that, a lot of times you can very easily go way over your line, because every single time you route as you're going deeper and deeper, you have a chance of going over. All right, so this is a way to ensure that you don't. Let's get back to it. Now you see the magic with that process is the fact that the edge guide is in a fixed position. Nothing moves. So we make one mortise from one side, flip the piece over, and make the other one from the other side. And that ensures that they're both equally distant from these outside edges. So it makes it perfect. Now at this point, you would want to cut all these double mortises throughout your project. You probably have more than one to do. So you would want to cut them all. And then, this is where the magic happens. You want to grab a second piece that's sort of a piece of scrap. That's exactly the same dimensions as your actual work pieces. Because what we need to do is remove the center section just for the sake of setup, right? So you would change your router at that point, and again, you've already cut all of your mortises, so it's okay to change this router setup if you're thinking in terms of a larger project, right? So change the setup so that the router bit is now cutting in the center of that joint, and you'll clear it out and it'll look something like this. And this is what we're going to use for our initial setup. So let me just grab a tenon piece and we'll get started. I'm just going to bring my tenon stock right over that test mortise. Make sure it's nice and flush on the outside edges, and then mark the outer walls of the mortise. Now I'm going to use a Sharpie here, but obviously you'd want to use a fine pencil for this. So I've just got my cutting gauge here, and I'm going to use that to establish a nice cut line all the way around the perimeter. That's going to sever the grain, and even though we're going to use the table saw, it's really going to help us get a nice clean cut with no tear out. The first series of cuts at the table saw will be all the way around the workpiece to create the shoulder, so I need my blade to be set at that pencil line or just a little bit below. And now I want to bring the fence in to set the shoulder cut. Now the miter gauge is going to hold the workpiece nice and steady, 90 degrees to the fence, and we can make all 4 of the cuts. And once again, thinking in terms of a larger project, you would want to make these cuts on all of your tenon workpieces before you monkey with the setup. Right, so we're going to assume that that work was done, and I can move my fence out of the way and get ready for the next set of cuts. Okay, we're done with our miter gauge here. And now we bring in what I call Big Daddy. This is my tenoning jig. It's a pretty straightforward device. Basically, the workpiece is held up against this plate. You've got a fence in the back that is adjustable for various angles, but mine is set 90 degrees to the table. And it's got a built-in clamping mechanism. It's very easy to adjust the plate back and forth to make very precise cuts. Now, you can make something like this yourself. I'll even link to a couple of plans in the show notes if you're interested in that. But you can make them so that they ride on your table saw fence. This one rides in the miter slot. Now before we can actually use that jig, we need to raise our blade height just so that it's going to the end of this shoulder. You could probably go a little bit shy. You certainly don't want to cut into this shoulder material. Now I'm going to secure the workpiece into the tenoning jig and bring it right up to the blade. Now I'm just going to adjust the jig so that the blade is cutting just on the outside of this line. That looks pretty good. My lines are fat, so I don't want to overcut. I'd rather have to cut twice. All right, so I'm going to make one cut on this side and then flip the workpiece and make a second cut on the other side. Now we'll do a test fit on the open mortise. And that's a little bit snug, so we'll adjust the jig and make a second round of cuts. Now we'll do a test fit. That's not bad. Maybe just a hair loose, but honestly, I could live with that. So now that we have that dialed in, we're going to cut the piece this way to get rid of the short shoulders. Now once again, if you're batching out, you're going to want to do all of your tenon pieces and catch them up to this point before you change your setting at the table saw. All right, so if we want to move on to the next phase, we just line up this tenon with one of our actual double mortises. Make sure it's pretty well lined up with the outside edges. And then you want to mark the location of the inner walls here. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to sneak up on it just like we did with the outside cheeks. Let's do a test fit. Okay, normally that doesn't happen. This is the problem with fat pencil lines is I thought I was leaving a little extra stock there, but it turns out I was a little bit tighter than anticipated because that is a perfect fit. Check it out. Oh man, that's nice. All right, so we do have a little bit of cleanup to do. Let's head back to the workbench. Now you'll very likely have some residual material in the inside corners here, which you could very easily remove with a downward chop and a chop inward like this. But the biggest offender is likely to be the space between the two tenons, so you just need a narrow chisel. You'll be able to remove that. And if you have any unevenness in your shoulders here, you can usually feel it with your fingers. This is a great job for a shoulder plane. So a little bit of cleanup here should do it. So now let's do our final test fit here and see how we did. Oh yeah, that is nice. Now, this isn't really the kind of joint that you're going to bust out on every single project, but if you have something with large work pieces where you have enough real estate in the material to make a double mortise and tenon joint, I don't think there's anything wrong with getting double the surface area for that glue to bind to. And now that you know how to do it, you could show it off to your family and friends, and then put it into a hole where no one will ever see it, which is my favorite thing about joinery. All right, so give it a shot. Double mortise and tenon's pretty cool. Another step on your way to becoming a woodworking ninja.